Welcome to Tell Us Something. Are you getting ready, Marissa? Thank you for coming out tonight for live storytelling here in Missoula. Tell Us Something is proud to be fiscally sponsored by Missoula Community Foundation. This event will be videotaped by Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grants Program to nonprofit organizations. For more information about the grant program, please contact MCAT at 542-6228. Thanks to our sponsors, the Top Hat Lounge, the Wilma, CabinetParts.com, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction Books, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Designs, Find, and Martin McCain's Woodwork Design. Please silence your cell phones and other mobile devices. You came to listen. Let the listening begin. You are Tell Us Something, and Tell Us Something is you. Without your ears, without your stories, there is no Tell Us Something. We are sharing a unique experience together tonight in a way that is not possible with radio or podcasts. Although Tell Us Something does produce a weekly podcast, and you can subscribe to it. Now, more than ever, it is important to share our stories with each other to bring understanding. It is important to actively listen to one another, to join together, and to support each other. Thank you for your support of each other and of each other's stories. Every Tell Us Something event is focused on a theme. Tonight's theme, the unlikeliest of places. Geraldine Carter is a mindset and mindfulness coach who focuses on helping busy, successful women trade in stress and overwhelm for clarity and peace of mind. She was once a 5-time marathoner, lived from a rolling duffel for 10 years, and has ridden her bicycle in more than 25 countries, including a 3-month trip from Burma to Beijing. She now lives in Missoula with her man, her 3 cats, and a little girl where she happily ignores her expired passport and pedals at coasting speed. Please welcome Geraldine Carter.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and braving the dark and cold and holiday shoppers. One day about 15 years ago, I was riding my bike up a hill in Laos, and I was just minding my own business, enjoying the scenery. It's mountainous, the hillsides are covered with tropical forest, the rivers run clear, the air is clean. There are hardly any vehicles around. It's a rural place, and people sadly are still pretty poor, so it's quiet, and what I hear is the sound of conversation wafting up from the rice paddies. And as I ride by, people's heads lift up and they look and they see me and they wave, and I wave back, and they flash these big, broad, relaxed smiles. Because it never freezes in Laos, and because there aren't that many cars around, the pavement's in great shape, and all of this conspires to make it an awesome place to ride bikes. So I'm riding along, and from seemingly out of nowhere, from up behind me comes another guy on a bike. I'm like, no way. And he probably thinks the same thing. And so we introduce each other. He says, "Hallo, my name is Walter. I'm from the Netherlands." And I'm like, "Hey, my name is Geraldine. I'm from the United States. Nice to meet you." And we start to catch up like old friends, because neither one of us has seen a foreigner, another tourist, anybody who speaks English in like weeks and weeks. And the conversation is like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm going to Angkor Wat. How about you?" "Oh yeah, me too. Cool, we should ride together." "Where'd you come from?" "Oh, I started in Kazakhstan." I'm like, "Where the hell is Kazakhstan?" He's like, "I rode across Tibet. Boy, it was really sandy, but oh my God, it was beautiful. Where'd you come from?" I'm like, "Oh, I started in Burma. I tried to go to China. They wouldn't let me in. Burma wouldn't let me out. So I rode across Thailand. Here I am." And And so it goes on like that, and on like that. And at some point, he says to me, Geraldine, I think your bicycle shorts are see-through. Like that, you say it, right? See-through? And I'm like, yeah, like that, see-through. But like, this is news to me. I have no idea. And there's nothing I can do about it, so we just keep on riding. And eventually, we get to the guest house where we're going to spend the night, and I take my hot bucket shower. And I change out of my clothes into my clothes, and I pick up my bike shorts off the floor, and I'm like, so what's the story with these bike shorts? And I stretch them across the back of my hand, and not only are they see-through, they're like fucking saran wrap. And I'm like, oh God, this is bad. And not only is it bad, it's like bad, 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 but in Laos it's really bad because they dress modestly. The women wear ankle-length sarongs, the men wear billowy pants, they wear long tops with three-quarter length sleeves. And here I am, like, showing my entire ass to the countryside. And I'm like, oh God. So let me just stop here for a moment just to tell you that when I was in my 20s, I had this fabulous job leading bicycle tours for a high-end travel company. And in the summertime, I'd be in France, Ireland, Switzerland, Portugal. And in the wintertime, they'd send us to warmer places, Patagonia, New Zealand, parts of Asia. And I just finished up leading trips in Bhutan. And in between trips, we'd have a schedule that was something like 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. And I would go to the fleet of bikes, and I'd grab one, and I'd take it for a tour. And over time, like in the time that I was doing this, my longest trip was 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 3, a little bit more. And when I started, I would bring everything with me, and I mean everything, like backup clothes, a cute top, wedges, cone wrenches, chain breaker tool, everything. And slowly I started to get rid of stuff because it was really heavy. And it wasn't until at some point I realized that if the shit really hit the fan, I would just get in a vehicle and go to a bike shop, and I'd be fine. And so at that point, I like really pared down and no more backup everything, and change of clothes, sunscreen, toothbrush, flip-flops, done. And so I never had the chance to figure out like how long does it take to wear your clothes out. And so that's how I ended up riding on a hill in Laos in threadbare bike shorts. Now, this is bad, but in my book doesn't constitute an emergency. So I wasn't going to get in a Song Tao to go to Vientiane, the capital. And a Song Tao is like a converted pickup truck with benches in the back and bars to hold on tight for when there's only room to stand. And that's fun and all, but I'd rather ride my bike. So I rummage through my stuff. I find a long sleeve t-shirt, tie it in a knot around my waist, and off we go. We get to Vientiane. We locate the bike shop. I go in. It's tiny. I'm like, oh God, what are the chances? And I asked the owner, who's French, in my very best French, I say, do you have any bicycle shorts? And he's like, oui, madame, I have 2 pairs. And I'm like, great. And I look at the first pair, and I'm like, oh God, because they just look like cheap Chinese knockoffs. And I think, bad. If you're riding 50 miles a day, the one thing you really want is a good pair of bike shorts. And these ones look just kind of crappy, and my heart sinks. And I look inside of the tag, and they're men's 2XL. And I'm like, okay, yeah, not gonna work. And I look at the other pair, and hanging off them is a tag that says Giant. I'm like, sweet. If you don't know biking, Giant's a well-known brand. They make good stuff. And I look inside, and the tag says men's medium. I'm like, all right. Medium, great. Men's, not so much, but okay. Beggars can't be choosers. So I go into the changing room, and I pull them on, and they fit. And I'm like, oh, awesome. What are the chances? And the seams are flat lock, which is more comfortable, and the spandex is comfortable, and the chamois feels great. I'm like, sweet. I'm just kind of looking in the mirror for a sec, admiring my luck. And then I make a fatal mistake. And I turn around, and emblazoned in enormous blue and white letters across the back of my ass is the word Giant. And I'm like, oh God, what do I do? And I sit there, I'm like, oh my God, there's no way I'm gonna ride across Southeast Asia with the word Giant on my ass. Like, I just can't do it, no way. Nothing could possibly be more mortifying. And then my rational brain comes online, it's like, get a hold of yourself. You're wearing see-through bike shorts. And I don't know if you've noticed, but nobody here speaks English. Much less are they going to appreciate the double entendre written on your butt. So get the bike shorts and let's go. And my squirrel brain's like, not so fast. This is totally crazy. I can't do it. Oh my God, this is mortifying. Nothing could possibly be more humiliating. Like, there's nothing that I'm more self-conscious about than the size of my ass. Like, there's no way you want me to wear a giant on my ass all day long, every day, for everybody to see and giggle at behind their hands. No, 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 no. And my rational brain comes back and it's like, Geraldine, this is the best. Like, where has your sense of humor gone? Like, nothing could be funnier than riding your bike with the word giant on your butt. I mean, you are going to win so many props when you get home for doing this. And where has your courage gone? Like, this doesn't sound like the person who just rode here from Burma and got marooned on a hillside and had to spend the night in a tomato truck with 4 drunk Burmese men with pigs in the back. Like, come on. You can do this. And I look at myself and I'm like, oh God, what do I do? And off they go. I put them back on the pins, pull back the curtain, I hand them to the owner, and we walk out. Walter looks at me quizzically. I'm like, no man could possibly understand. And so we're on the way back to the guest house, and we pass a fabric shop, and there's spools coming off, and so I ask for a square and some safety pins. And I fashion myself a little butt cape that flaps behind me in the breeze as we ride. And we set off and we go up past the plain of jars, me and my butt cape through the unexploded ordnances, to Hanoi, limestone karst formations. We ride up and down thousands of feet of terraced rice paddies. We go to a city of 8 million people in China called Kunming. You've never heard of it. We come back down. We ride through the tea plantations of Pu'er with my little butt cape, and we cross the Mekong River, and we get to Chiang Mai, Thailand, where each of us ends the cycling part of our trip. And this was an amazing journey. I can't even begin to describe everything that happened, what I learned, and all of it. And, this is a funny story. And there were times where it was downright miserable, hard, cold, dirty, polluted, and everything. But if I learned anything, and I could leave you with 2 things, it's 1, never leave home without your trusty butt cape. And 2, nothing good ever comes from looking at your butt in the mirror. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jody. Gary Walchola has lived in New York and taught English in Austria. Montana keeps calling him back home. Gary studies education and has worked as an actor, lifeguard, teaching assistant at a Renaissance fair, and played a murderer on a crime reenactment show. True story. He would like to thank his parents for teaching him the joy of stories and adventure. Please welcome Gary Walchola.
I'm on a train. I'm looking out the window at snow-covered fields. I'm leaving the mountains of Austria. Now I'm entering the forests of Slovakia. The trees are covered in mistletoe. And I think, ever since my great-grandparents left this place, I am the first one in our family ever to come back. I asked my dad where our ancestors came from, but he said that his grandparents didn't like to talk about it back then. And of course, since 2 world wars, communism, capitalism, the Velvet Revolution, the borders had changed quite a bit. But that year, I had a lucky opportunity. I was working as a teaching assistant in Austria, and I thought, well, this would be my chance to visit the village where my great-grandparents came from. So after a little bit more digging, we found a letter that said where my great-grandfather had been baptized. So I thought I would visit. I also found a news article that said that there was an Andy Warhol museum in the area, and I thought that would be interesting too, because my last name is Warchola, and Andy Warhol's original last name was Warhola. So, of course, it's a sort of, an Americanization, whatever, when they came in through immigration. So, finally, I'm traveling. It's New Year's Day. The train is late because there's snow. It's really, really, really cold, and I'm glad I wore long underwear. I get on a bus in Kosacha, and I'm sitting in the bus, and I'm listening to everyone else talking. I look out on the highway, and I see a bunch of advertisements for cell phones or whatever in a language that I can't even understand, covering communist East Bloc housing and farm fields. And I think, my ancestors spoke this language for generations, and I have no idea what anyone is saying. When I finally get to the village, I look out and I think, this place must look nothing like the place that my great-grandfather left behind. There's only communist block housing, there's a warehouse, there's houses that all look like they were built probably about 40 years ago or so. I get out and I try to find some kind of tourist office or something. I see a sign for a tourist office, and a guy points me there, but it's closed. I keep going. I see a zoo with a picture of a tiger on a rusted old metal sign, but it's closed for the season too. I keep going to the edge of the town, and I see a lake that's frozen over. There are people ice skating on the lake. Next to the lake is a brand new building, a hotel. That's where I'm staying for the night. So I go over there, and there's a man behind the counter. I go up, I begin talking with him, and it turns out that he's a Turkish man who had lived in Austria for a few years, so it's actually easier for us both to speak German to each other, which is interesting because it's neither one of our native languages and we are not in the country where it's spoken. So I go into the dining room with him, and I look out at the window and I see the people ice skating. And I ask him, is there any way that maybe I could rent some ice skates? That looks like a lot of fun. He turns to the other people and they start talking for a bit. They turn back to me and they say, no. Okay. I go up to my room. The hotel is completely empty, and I feel a little bit like I'm in The Shining. So I decide to go wander around the town a little bit. I go outside, I pass some of the block housing. There's a little hill where kids are sledding down the hill and having fun. I keep going, I cross the river into Boksa, which is actually the village where my grandfather lived. But it looks like all of these houses are new too. Also, except for the church. The church was probably there during his time. The next day I decide that I want to visit this Andy Warhol museum. I try to find a bus. There's no buses that day. So I wait another day. The next day I finally am able to catch a bus. I'm riding to Metzeler-Borche, and I miss the stop, of course. So I'm brought way over to the other edge of the town, and I walk back. I see an onion-domed Eastern Orthodox church. It's beautiful, right next to the museum, which seems a little bit out of place in this town. It's a bit of a pop art museum with Campbell's soup cans right in front of it, and no one in the parking lot. I go up to the front door, and it's closed. So I traveled all this way, and I don't get to see the museum. Well, okay, I have to work tomorrow, so I guess I better go get a ticket back home. I go and I buy a train ticket, but the next train isn't leaving for about 3 hours, so I have some time to kill. I wander around the town, I go get a coffee, and I decide to take one last look at the museum. I see a guy walking towards the museum. It looks like he's going inside. It looks like he works there. I run up to him and I try to ask him a question, and he says, he doesn't speak English. And I say, well, sprechen Sie Deutsch? No. Russian? Oh, no. Okay, all right. And I say, well, it's closed? And he nods, yes. I start to head back to the train station. But then I hear, hey! And he waves for me to come over. He opens the door and he lets me in. So I pay the admission fee, and I head up the stairs. They turn on the light and they start playing music. I look around. It's a pop art installation in eastern Slovakia, near the border of Poland and Ukraine. Suddenly, I'm no longer in eastern Slovakia. I'm in New York again, a place where I had used to live. I had moved to New York as an actor a couple years before that. Perhaps I wanted my own, 15 minutes of fame. And I think about it. This New York, Andy Warhol's New York, looks so small, different, but yet similar to the same place that I had lived. And I wondered, Andy Warhol's parents came from this place. What part of this place was still with him? And what part of this place is still with me? We always like to say, white Americans, white European Americans, we always like to say, I'm Irish, I'm German, and I always said I'm Slovak, but I've never really understood what that means. Eventually, I have to go. I leave the museum, and I get on the train. I'm riding out through the snow-covered fields, and I look out, and I remember being in my great-grandfather's village, standing in the snow-covered fields. I walk up behind the church and pass through the forests. I get to a field, and I ask myself, did my great-grandfather also stand in this place? Did he stand here the day before he left, maybe? I think about all the people who've ever had to leave their homes because of poverty or war, something that's still happening today. And I imagine my grandfather thinking, looking out on this place. He too would travel around the world, but he would never see this place ever again. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. If our next storyteller looks familiar to you, it's probably because she works at the customer service desk at the Good Food Store. Ann Karp also wields a paintbrush for Sideways Gaze Signs, her window and sign art business. She and her husband, Jay, hiked the Appalachian Trail a few years ago with wet feet through the entire state of Massachusetts, but that's not her story tonight. Please welcome Ann Karp.
The driveway was really long, maybe a mile long, but surprisingly beautiful. There were tall Georgia pines on each side of it, and I went up, parked the car, and went in the front gates. I left with the lady there. I left my wallet with my ID and all my money, anything metal I had on me. I left the car keys, and with me I brought just the clothes on my back and a cotton handkerchief full of quarters for the vending machines. I went down a long hallway, and I got to the waiting room, so I took a seat, and it was full of people and families running around, and it smelled like microwave popcorn from the vending machines. And I waited till my name was called, and then I went through a really heavy locked door, and it locked behind me. And then I went through another very heavy door, and that one locked behind me. And then I was in this long, narrow room, and it was a room full of dudes. And one of them stood up, and that was Marcus. And he gave me a hug, he offered me a seat, and a styrofoam cup full of water from the water cooler, and we sat and we talked. And we talked about literature and politics and our lives and the usual stuff you talk with your friends about. And I got stuff from the vending machines, we ate snacks, and we visited for a long time, and then when it was time for me to go, I went and he stayed. And that is kind of what it's like to visit death row in Jackson, Georgia. So you might wonder how I came to have a friend on death row in Georgia, so here's how. At the time, I lived on a Christian pecan farm commune in rural Georgia, which is a story for another time. There was one weekend a little conference about prisons, and I went to it, and somebody took photos and wrote up a little article in a newsletter, and And that newsletter was circulated, and it went to the prisons, and Marcus saw the newsletter, he saw my picture in it, and he told me later, he thought, we're gonna be friends. That sounds a little creepy. But he gave the letter to the guy who worked with that prison ministry, and the guy gave it to me, and he said, don't feel any obligation to write to this guy. You don't have to write to this guy. He's on death row. He seems okay. So so I read the letter, and I was idealistic and a little bit younger, and I said, okay, and so I started writing to him, and he wrote back, and we exchanged letters maybe once or twice a month, and we got to know each other better, learned about his mom and his daughter and his family and his life, and after maybe a year or two, he asked if I wanted to be on his visitor list. So an inmate gets, I think it's 12 people who can come see them. And I was thinking about it. I think that would be the only people you'd ever see besides other inmates and guards and maybe the occasional lawyer. So this is a pretty special request. So I got the request, and I don't know why I never really looked into what Marcus had done to be convicted to end up where he was. And I finally, and I mean, it's not like the pecan farm didn't have internet or something. Slow internet. So I finally did that. I went into the office one night and I fired up the old computer and I Googled his name. And the news results came forth, and I kind of sat there paralyzed. I had always assumed, and I'm not sure why, that it had just been some kind of barroom brawl gone wrong and unintentional, just something bad happened, accidental, but no, I was wrong. It was really bad. He had raped and murdered a 15-year-old girl, and so I sat there, and I'm a feminist. I'm a nonviolent person. If I had just read about Marcus in the paper, I would have assumed a lot of things about him, and a lot of those things would probably be true. And I realized I couldn't really figure out what to do logically. So I think the question came down to, who can I be friends with? Who can be friends with me? And I've always believed that we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. But this, I mean, how far does that go? So I just sort of let it simmer for a couple of days. And eventually occasionally you get that still small voice inside that very occasionally, in my case, provides a little bit of guidance. And it said, yes, you can be friends. You and Marcus can be friends. So I said, yes, I'll be on your visitor list. And so from there, it was pretty simple. I just checked out the old Buick from the commune and drove up to what's it called? The Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, and I do that a couple times a year. And we'd visit for 5 or 6 hours. When you don't get a lot of visitors, you want to maximize your time. So we'd visit for a really long time each time. And we talked about everything. I got to know him. I learned a lot from him. The very first time I went, I think he felt like he had to sort of explain himself or be upfront. And so he told me that story. And he never said he didn't do it. So I think he did it. And he was really nervous when he was telling the story. Normally he was really calm, and he was about, he had a daughter about my age and very warm, but he was just so nervous when he told this story, and just beads of sweat. And so that was the first time, and we didn't really talk about that again. I also learned he had this remarkable approach to the rest of his life on death row, and he had a name for it. He called it Life Row Ministries. And I don't know if it was penance or just the way he was, but he seemed to be trying to do the most good that he possibly could in the time he had left. So he wrote a lot. He was a prolific writer. He was a man of faith. He prayed for so many people, and he tried to be a good dad, a good son. And he counseled people. He had pen pals all over the world. He had lots and lots of pen pals. And he would even counsel and listen to the guards, the people who were charged with keeping him in there. I mean, they were from a small town, impoverished small town, not a lot of employment opportunities. They had their problems too, and so he'd listen to them. And so that was our friendship. And I'd visit him a couple of times a year for a couple of years. And then I moved to Montana. And we grew apart at that point, and that's all on me. Of course, we couldn't visit anymore, but I just gradually, my life here, I guess it just happens with friends sometimes. So I wrote a little less and a little less until we weren't writing anymore. And I would always think of him, though, when I would be driving around and hear the radio and I'd hear of someone who had been executed on death row. I would go home immediately and, was it Marcus? Was it Marcus? And one time I was driving home from work and I heard the news report that somebody in Georgia had had the lethal injection, and I went home and I Googled his name, and it was him. So that was the second time I had sat paralyzed in front of a computer screen thinking about Marcus. And it was harder than I expected to hear that, to learn that, even though, I mean, everybody knew he was going to run out of appeals sooner or later. And the next day I talked with my father-in-law, who still lived in Georgia. He provided a few details that he'd learned from the news that kind of helped me. Marcus had been surrounded by, his family had been there, so that was good to learn. And he'd been praying in his last moments, which is very Marcus. And some of his last words were that he hoped that his death would bring some kind of small amount of peace to the family of the victim. So that was on his mind till the end, too. So that's the end of Marcus's story and his life. And as for me, I'm a little bit older and probably more jaded now, but I'm really grateful that I said yes to that friendship. And I would hope that if an opportunity, wherever it came from, for an unusual friendship came up again, I hope that I would say yes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Greg Reagan is a fourth-generation Michigander, but has been living in Missoula for 10 years. He spends most of his time cooking, playing kickball, listening to records, reading comic books, and thinking about where he will find his next taco. Please welcome Greg Reagan.
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, as was my father, as was his father. And when you're born in a city like Detroit, you don't get to choose your sports allegiance. I was born a Red Wings fan, a Tigers fan, a Pistons fan, and really unfortunately, a Detroit Lions fan. If you don't know, the Detroit Lions are habitually the worst franchise in professional sports. Since I was born, the Red Wings have won 4 Stanley Cups, the Tigers have won a World Series and played in 2 others, the Pistons have won 3 World Championships, and the Lions, well, since my father was born, the Lions have won 1 playoff game. That was 25 years ago. They're bad. They're just really, really bad. They've been bad my whole life. 8 years ago, they set the record for losses in a season with 16. 0 wins, 16 losses. But unlike here in Montana, you don't get to choose your sports teams when you're from Detroit. But I'm always gonna be a Detroit Lions fan, forever and ever and ever. And not because anything they've ever done on the field, because any joy they've ever brought me has been far, far, far outweighed by just heartbreak and disappointment. But I'm gonna be a Detroit Lions fan through and through because of one day in 2012 when the Detroit Lions saved my life. I moved to Missoula about 10 years ago, and one of the first things I remember about moving to Missoula were people asking me, have I ever been to Butte? Specifically, have I ever been to Butte on St. Patrick's Day? If you don't know anything about Butte, it's a very, very proud old mining town around the turn of the century, had over 100,000 people, and just money and culture and music and life. And then the mines dried up, and the population, a lot of them left. But a lot of that population were descendants of Irish immigrants who came to work in those mines. And so St. Patrick's Day is it's something. It's something to the people of Butte. They take it pretty seriously. There's a lot of music and a lot of dancing and a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting. And so in 2012, I decided to, check that off my Montana bucket list and spend a St. Patrick's Day in Butte. A friend of a friend had just opened a new micro distillery in Butte and asked my friend if she had any friends that would want to come and work in the tasting room on St. Patrick's Day. Sounded like that was an A-OK job with me, working as a bartender on St. Patrick's Day. And so we decided to go over to Butte. St. Patrick's Day was on a Saturday that year. We decided to go over on Friday night, spend all day Saturday, and come back Sunday. And we went over in 2 shifts because some of us couldn't get off work earlier. I was in part of the early shift. We went over early, and we got to the place we were staying, and we checked it out, and we set up our beds and everything, and then decided to go walk around old, historic uptown Butte. That blew my mind. Butte is such a cool town with so many beautiful, and just beautiful architecture, and you can just see the life that, if it's not there now, it definitely once was, but there's a lot of people working there now to bring it back, and I'm with them on that. But just walking around this place with these beautiful, ornate, awesome buildings that were, in various states of disrepair, it reminded me a lot of Detroit in that way. And we walked around for, I have no idea how long, an hour, hour and a half, and when we were walking back, we were about a block away from the place we were staying, and I could see that my friends from the second shift had just arrived and were literally just getting out of the car, had sleeping bags under their arms and backpacks over their shoulders. And we were really excited to go, talk to them about all the cool stuff we just saw. And we were about a half a block away, and from across the street, I just hear this, "Hey!" And I didn't think anything of it, so we kept walking. I want to say hi to my friends. "Hey!" I still don't think anything of it. And then I hear it, it's really loud, "Hey, you!" And I look, and there's 3 guys marching across the street. And it's kind of a busy street, North Montana Avenue in Butte. It's not exactly it's kind of a busy street, and they're just marching over. They're not talking to me, obviously, so I just keep walking. I'm really excited to say hi to my friends. And then they walk all the way across the street, and the guy in the lead walks right up to me, and he says, "Hey, I asked you a question." I'm sorry, what did you ask me? I said, "Do you consider yourself a certified hipster?" And just so we know, I was literally wearing exactly what I'm wearing right now. I think I had a hoodie on. I had jeans, a hoodie, this hat that my parents bought in Ireland that I thought was pretty appropriate to wear on St. Patrick's Day. And some glasses. And he asked me again. I said, "Do you consider yourself a certified hipster?" And at this time, I have no recollection of what happened next. This is all hearsay from my friends who told me what happened because I completely blacked out from fear. But while I was blacked out, pure instinct took over. And I looked at these guys, and I just kind of stood there. There's 3 guys. The only thing I remember about these guys is they were 9 feet tall and reeked of Jameson whiskey. And I looked him, and I looked him up and down, and I looked all around, and then I saw it. The guy in front, the guy who had pushed me, the guy who had asked me if I was a hipster was wearing a baseball cap. And on the front of that baseball cap, in shining Honolulu blue and silver, was a Detroit Lion. And I don't remember any of this. It's all been told to me secondhand. But I just looked at this guy. I said, "You know what? I don't consider myself a certified hipster, but I do consider myself a certified Lions fan." And I tapped him on the bill of his cap. And this obviously confused the hell out of him. He had no idea what to make of me. He just looked at me and I said, are you from Michigan? I'm from Michigan. And he said, "No, I'm from fucking Butte." And I said, "Well then, why the hell are you a Lions fan?" I don't know. I've literally to this day have never met anyone outside of the state of Michigan who was a Lions fan by choice. Like, I don't understand it. But I just started talking to him about the Lions. I said, "Hey man, you think they got a chance this year? I don't know, they might make the playoffs. How about that Calvin Johnson? You think he's gonna catch 1,000 yards this year? What do you think?" I took off my hoodie, I rolled up my sleeve, and I showed him my Detroit tattoo. And all the while, I was just like motioning behind my friends, like, "Get in the door, get away from these guys. Let's get out of here." And I talked to him, like I said, I don't remember any of this. I don't know how long it took, but I talked to him for what seemed like forever. We might have been out there for an hour. I'm really not sure. But I just kept backing away and backing away and backing away, closer to the door, closer to the door, closer to the door, and finally said, "All right, guys, happy St. Patrick's Day." And I walked in the door behind me and I locked it. And that's when my memory kicks back in, and I just remember thinking, "Breathe, Greg, breathe. You're alive. You're alive. Breathe." And from that day forward, forever and ever and ever, through and through, to the deepest parts of my soul, I will be a Detroit Lions fan. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And thanks to all of our sponsors, the Top Hat Lounge, the Wilma, CabinetParts.com, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction Books, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Designs, Find, and Martin McCain Woodworks and Design. You know, people often ask me how to sign up to tell a story at Tell Us Something. The themes are on, I'll tell you, Marissa. The themes are on the little handout sheet that you got when you walked in, you know, the audience participation sheet, which we'll have a little bit of that here in a few minutes. Go to tellussomething.org starting tomorrow and find a theme that resonates for you. Click on the link, a spreadsheet will open. Enter your information in the spreadsheet. Call the number 406-203-4683 to pitch your story and sign up to share a story in 2017. We'll be having a 10-minute intermission. Grab a drink, stretch your legs, swing by the merch table to do your holiday shopping. Get one of these cool hoodies. Yeah, printed. At Zoo City Apparel, look at the back. Your story matters. So grab a hoodie, grab a CD from Montana Public Radio's Tell Us Something Radio Hour. Free t-shirt with the purchase of a hoodie. And see you in 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Tell Us Something, Audience Participation Edition. The theme for this is also the unlikeliest of places. As a teenager in Missoula, my friend Christine and I found out what no trespassing meant when we cannot read it, something a sign on a horseback adventure. We were chased away on horseback by a man in a truck, firing a shotgun from his truck while driving. Lesson learned.
-10, last Friday. 1-inch ice, 7-month-old puppy. Bind down, dog runs, ice waves like an earthquake. Dog falls through. I swim, break ice, dog saved. Amazing. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
It sounded like a poem. You got us up on a timer, Marissa? Okay. Oh, good. Unlikeliest of places. My pants fell down in the front yard, exposing my butt to the neighbors who were we were trying to buy a house from. Oh, no, my butt to the homeowners we were trying to buy a house from.
I found an unopened jar of bright orange Kraft spreadable cheese buried in the ice in Antarctica. The date read 1964. It was delicious.
The unlikeliest of places. In 2015, at the bottom of Mooney Falls in Havasu Canyon, which is an offshoot of the Grand Canyon, I took a couple of pictures of a couple at their request with the waterfall as a backdrop. We spoke for a couple of minutes when we simultaneously recognized each other. He had become a doctor he had been my doctor. Man, it's hard to read some people's handwriting. He had been my doctor from 1977 to 1985, at which point he moved to Seattle. I hadn't seen him in 30 years.
This year, my partner planned a romantic getaway for my birthday. He took me to Goldbug Hot Springs. 3 hours and a hike. We trekked through the snow on a weekday night, and then we arrived at the hot springs, where we were greeted by 4 Missoulians drinking a bag of wine. When they learned it was my birthday, they all sang happy birthday to me. It's pretty Missoula.
I like that it was a bag of wine. The last time I was at a hot springs, people were drinking out of glass bottles. I know. Who brings glass to a water feature? I was so angry. I did reprimand them. I was like that, get off my lawn, kids, kind of guy. The unlikeliest of places. One time I was in love with a dude, like really, really in love with him. He turned out to be a jerk. So in the unlikeliest of places, I learned to love myself.
Once when I was visiting Berkeley, California, a clerk in a shop commented on my KUFM t-shirt. It started a conversation that led us to realize we had been neighbors as children in Lead, South Dakota, 30 years earlier. There was a spanking involved. When we were kids, not as an adult.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry I keep forgetting to introduce you. This is Lauren Champa, everybody. And B, fix the mic for you. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, good. The unlikeliest of places. I never thought one of my life's biggest regrets would come from a place on the side of the road in between 2 towns I couldn't pronounce, across from the beach somewhere in Basque Country. While on my month bikepacking honeymoon. Okay, it was getting dark. We were 6 kilometers from our camp for the night, and for the first time in 250 miles, kilometers and miles in the same, okay. My wife was 100 yards in front of me. Wow. Telling me to hurry up. Oh, she'll do that the rest of your marriage. I love you, Joyce. We had pulled out of something I can't pronounce, to the crest of an old hill, seen some sheep. Then people for the past 2 weeks, our dried apricot jam and bread supply was low. The Basque cuisine was great, but I'd never gone so long without pizza. In order of desperation in Durango, Spain, resulted in pizza with canned tuna. So that didn't count. Circling back to the side of the road somewhere in France, I really should have stopped at that gift from God across the beach. I'll probably never eat another pizza vending machine in a more perfect place at a more perfect time. I should have stopped. It was so long.
I told you. This is the last one. There he was, tall, dark, and wearing a plaid black and red jacket. He stood out from the crowd. It was obvious he was not from here. He turns around in the beautiful court of the English church in London. Banos. I called out. There was my college roommate's best friend who was living in my living room 6 months earlier. No idea he would be in London when I was in London. He was supposed to be living in Thailand. That is life.
Thanks, everybody who participated in that. Thanks, Lauren, for helping me out. Our next storyteller is a writer, comedian, forester, communications director, radio announcer. These are only just a few of the job descriptions Paula Short has enjoyed over the years. The daughter of a man with gypsy blood in his veins, Paula will share the story of one of the greatest adventures of her vagabond childhood when her dad wrangled her birthday present in the unlikeliest of places. Her husband and 2 kids are at home, unaware that she's about to leap out of her comfort zone. Please welcome Paula Short.
There's a race of men who don't fit in, a race who can't sit still. So they break the hearts of kith and kin and they roam the world at will. If Robert Service would have added a line that said, and they bring along their kid daughter with them, that would have pretty much summed up my childhood with my father. My story begins on July 18th, 1981. I remember the day because it happens to be my 11th birthday. I am sitting in the passenger seat of our 1977 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, and I am pouting and glaring at my father because we've been in the car for days without stopping, and I want, for my birthday, the one thing I want, I have been asking and begging and prodding him for 6 months. Like most girls my age, I want to go horseback riding, and it's a small ask, I feel, considering all the things that I've put up with my father through the years. So it's not that I think that my father is going to intentionally slight me on my birthday and deny me this birthday wish, but I'm concerned that some bright, shiny object is going to distract him, and we are going to be off on yet another adventure that he thinks is cool, but ultimately comes at my expense. This is how we ended up with a 1/3 ownership in a gold dredging operation in Georgia. This is how the previous summer I got tossed out of a raft in Paducah, Kentucky. And this is also how I came to have my fortune told by a drunk gypsy in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. So I'm quite familiar with the adventures of my father and how this is going to go, and I have serious concerns about getting to ride a horse for my 11th birthday. So to back up a little bit, addiction took my mother out of our lives when I was an infant, though it wouldn't kill her for many, many more years. But my father, upon hearing that he was now a single parent with sole custody of a very young daughter, did what most responsible parents, fathers of young girls would do. We threw all our shit in the car and hit the road. And this is how most of my childhood went, at least the formative years when you're supposed to form your personality and your, general common sense. So it explains a lot about my behavior. So we end up in this pattern where we live in the car. The address is the 77 Oldsmobile. The zip code is changing constantly. At one time, I actually asked my father in earnest if we were fugitives. He never gave me exactly a straight answer on that. But we would go and spend the summer at some sort of adventure, doing something that would be something my father always wanted to do, or some adventure he always wanted to take. And I just remember many times driving down the road, and we would drive while I was sleeping, because I think that was, my dad would smoke cigarettes and listen to classic country on the radio, and his daughter would shut up for a few minutes and sleep while we covered some miles. And I remember even, in fact, having my head on his lap and my feet not even touching the door on the passenger side. I mean, that's how young I was, and we just continued to travel. And so we would vagabond around the country, and literally at Labor Day, I would put on my grown-up hat and I'd say, I think I'm supposed to be at school. Like, there's a law about that. And my father would we'd pull over whatever town we happened to be in, and we would drive up and down the streets looking for the school, which my father schooled me wisely and said, well, it'll be the one with the swing set out in front and the flagpole. So we would pull into the elementary school, and my dad would get out of the car, and he'd hold my hand, and he'd walk me up, and he would sign me into school, wherever we happened to be at that moment. This is how I came to go to second grade in 5 different schools. In 3rd grade, I started in Chicago, finished in Georgia, 4th grade in Georgia, 5th grade at my grandparents' house, and then 6th grade, which brings me to where I am now. I'm going into 6th grade. It's my birthday, and I just want to go horseback riding. So my father pulls into this campground, and I perk up a little bit because I see a bunch of trail horses that are saddled and tied to the hitching rail in the front, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is going to happen. And my dad goes inside, tells me to wait in the car. At this point, I'm aware that I have an unconventional childhood, but I don't necessarily see it as a detriment. I mean, there's no mom, there's no home, there's no white picket fence, there's no cookies after school. But there's all this amazing adventure and unconventional things. I know by this time in my life, I am the youngest person to have ever been in the Playboy Club in Chicago, because it was a side remodeling gig for my old man. And by this time, I've also been to jail and released on our own recognizance by a judge who was very pissed off at the officer who drug a guy and his kid daughter into jail that day. So I'm watching and waiting, and my dad comes out, and I can tell by the way he's walking towards the car. There's something has happened. He has a sprightly gait, and he's kind of bounding over to the car, and I'm not sure whether to be scared or frustrated or just generally pissed off. And so my dad comes over, and he jumps in the car, and by this time, the 77 Oldsmobile, we're pulling a 13-foot bumper pull. We've actually expanded onto our house. We've remodeled. We've got this bumper pull behind us. But he says, hey, and this is how my father always got me to do things that were just crazy, like getting tossed out of a raft. He said, hey, you know how you said you wanted to ride a horse for your birthday? I said, yeah. He says, well, you're going to get to ride a horse today, and you're going to get to ride a horse every single day for the rest of the summer. And that is exactly what happened, because I came to find out later, my father went inside to get a 1-hour trail ride for his kid, so she would shut up already. And they said no trail rides because the Wranglers, just 2 weeks prior at the 4th of July rodeo, both the Wranglers had been seriously injured. One was gored by a bull and one broke his leg in the bronc riding. Quite a wreck. And the horses were out there only until the rancher from Wyoming who had contracted the string was going to come and pick them up. And I could say that I'm surprised, but I'm not, because apparently my father said, well, what's a job like that pay? Now, the compelling thing is, I had never ridden a horse, and I had never seen my father ride a horse. But somehow he said something about it like riding a bike, and we pulled over, and we put the stabilizer blocks under the bumper pull camper, and we became Wranglers that day with 0 experience, guiding dudes in the Black Hills of South Dakota. 30 horses in the string, and we would get up and we would saddle them every day, and we would give trail rides to guests of all sorts. We made friends for a lifetime doing that, and it would be maybe a 1-hour trail ride or even an all-day excursion with my dad. And so I'm reminded of Robert Service again, where he says that in that poem, Men That Don't Fit In, you know, they rage the flood, they rove the crest, and they climb the mountain crest. Theirs is the blood of the gypsy curse, and they don't know how to rest. And so it's how it went with my father. It was sort of a role reversal. I think in a lot of ways I was the grown-up. He was the kid. He was enjoying himself. I came up here to the University of Montana, got my degree, and then I put him through college in his 60s as well. So I know. It was a lot of fun. And my unlikeliest of places, and he's no longer here, and if there would have been an epitaph or even a headstone, which he wanted neither, it probably would be the closing line of that Robert Service poem, and it would basically be, he's a rolling stone and it's bred in the bone. He's the man that won't fit in. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Charles Abramson came to Missoula just for the summer after graduating from the University of Florida in 1963. 3 years ago, he hosted a party to celebrate his 50-year running bar tab just around the corner here at the Stockman Bar. A tab which he opened the day he got here, and he still has never paid it off. Abe has been in the real estate business here in western Montana since returning from East Asia in 1975, where he served part of his 37 years as an Air Force officer in various active and reserve assignments, retiring as a lieutenant colonel on his 60th birthday in 2003. He is a founding and continuing trustee of the Missoula Public Library Foundation, a mentor in Missoula Veterans Court, and has been on staff at the Burning Man Festival for 13 years. His chief guiding principle is first things first, but not necessarily in that order. Please welcome Abe Abramson.
As you should have been. Yeah. Okay, so I'm a young Air Force officer in the Middle East, and I'm a reservist on active duty, which is, there's a lot of detail that's not important. But at a certain point, the Air Force decided they didn't need a reserve officer on active duty in the Orient, and I became, in Taiwan, a reserve officer in the active reserves, not on active duty. Okay, enough of that. So anyway, but the thing is, when you're on military orders in a foreign country, there's a thing called the SOFA, the Status of Forces Agreement. And it controls more than you know in the beginning. So I'm in the reserves. I'm studying Tang Dynasty poetry 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, and I'm studying a Korean martial art, Tang Sho Dao, 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, and recovering from, I'd had Hep A, which for reasons I don't understand, I pretty much totally licked. And one day, it comes to my attention that some people were looking for me, because how would I know that if you're no longer on active duty and the country doesn't know you're there and they hear you're there, they want to know why you're there. And it's a little bit more complicated, but basically it could have been an international incident. So here's this guy that was here, he never left. I have a passport, but I don't have a visa because I'm on orders. And so if some of you have had friends or yourselves are from other countries, you can't even get a visa renewed in most countries without leaving the country and getting it renewed and coming back. Well, I didn't have a visa. And through a lot of things that are not real complicated, but I found out that one of the number 2 people in their State Department, Foreign Ministry, had a master's degree in history from the University of Montana. So I can't remember how I knew that. In fact, I didn't know that. Somebody told me that. So anyway, I call up to Taipei, to that office, and I say, I'm from Missoula, Montana, and I'd like to come up and meet with Mr. Sam H.C. Chen. And I don't hear anything. And people are still looking for me. And so I finally get to the point where I do get an appointment. I'm going to go see him. And so I'm ready to go to Hong Kong where I can get a visa. And I go up. Now you got to think about this. Let's say there was a Chinese student in the United States whose visa had expired, and he finds out that the Undersecretary of State in Washington, D.C., whom he's never talked to or anything, has a degree from where he's from in China. That's kind of that situation. So I go up there, and I go into the office, which is kind of complicated, and we're sitting there, and I say, I understand that your advisor was Dr. Payne, someone who I knew and all that, and he's just kind of smiling and everything, and I explained to him that, you know, I didn't know that when I got off active duty that I really wasn't here anymore, and that I had to go and come back even though I'm in the active reserves. And he smiled and everything, and it was real quiet there for a while. And then I showed him I had a passport, and he's just smiling, sitting behind his desk, and then, you know, it's kind of like, you know those prison camp movies where they're trying to figure out who the spy is? And they say, okay, who won the World Series last year, you know? And if you don't know, you're it, right? So I'm sitting there, and I'm smiling and everything, and he's still smiling, and he goes, we've never met before. And he doesn't understand about the reserves and the active reserves and active duty and the whole thing, and he just knows that I'm from Missoula, or I might be. And all of a sudden, it's really kind of quiet, and I'm kind of shuffling, and he says, who are the 4 Bs? I said, now, when I got here in '63, there was only one 4Bs that was down there on Broadway. And there have been a lot of them. In fact, there's one just opened where Perkins was. They're just reopening as the 4Bs. But I said, excuse me? And he said, well, you're from Missoula, right? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, who are the 4Bs? And just like the guy that said he doesn't remember the thing about the Detroit Lions, I don't know where it came from, but I had met most of the people involved, and I said, well, the guy that started it with his wife, who met in a orphan's home in Twin Bridges, they call him Bill Hainline, but his real name's Wilbur. And his wife they call Buddy. And then there's Wilbur Jr. that they call Bill Jr. or Jr. And I couldn't remember the daughter's name. And he's just smiling there, sitting there. And he goes, ha, 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 ha. And I said, and then I thought he was laughing again, and he goes, Baba. Oh, Barbara. Oh, okay, Barbara. Okay. So he says, so why are you here? I said, well, it's a big misunderstanding. See, I was here on orders, and then I'm kind of on different kind of orders, but not the ones about the treaty that we have at the time. And so he rolls his eyes kind of. He goes, oh, he picks up the phone, and I understand a little bit of what he's saying. I speak a little bit of Chinese, and he calls this guy, and he says, I'm sending this guy over to see you and blah, 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 and see what you can do. And so I'm already in the, what I thought was the unlikeliest of places, being asked what were the 4 Bs. But he takes me out some secret back staircase and hails a cab a block away and doesn't say anything to the cab, but he just gives him a little piece of paper with an address on it. Now, I don't know what it is, and he just said, you go there and you go in and you talk to my friend. Well, I just happen to know that the place he takes me is the kind of place we don't have here. We don't have a state police as such. But he takes, and the cab won't even go up to the building. The cab says, over there, over there. So I go in, and I get to the door, and they let me in, and I go up, and they're kind of expecting me, and I go into this like shotgun thing where there's a ante room, and then somebody comes out and takes me into the waiting room, and then somebody pours me tea. And then this door slams open, and this enormous Oriental gentleman, probably 6'4" and maybe 300 pounds. He opens the door and he says, "You went to school with my friend." And in my best English, I said, "Yes, I went to school with your friend." And he said, "Come into the office." So we go into the office, sit down, and he pushes a button on his desk. He starts telling me how in 1947 he was in San Antonio, Texas, learning to fly, and he was in the Chinese Air Force and all this kind of stuff. And I'm saying, I showed him my passport. And he goes, "Oh." So, but he's pushed this button. This woman comes in now. Some of you know the expression kowtow, which in standard Chinese is koto, which means head, floor. This woman comes in and bangs her head on his desk. Literally, I'm not making this up. He hands her the passport, and she leaves, and then we talk about the time he was served orange watermelon in San Antonio, Texas, and stuff like that. And he comes back, and we talk about different things and how I went to school with his friend and how they were friends on the mainland and everything like that. And then this woman comes back in, bangs her head on the desk again, hands him the passport, and he looks at it and hands it to me and says, basically, "That will be all," something like that. And so I'm on my way, remember, to Hong Kong. So I go out and I have to walk about 4 blocks to get a cab, and I go to the Feijijiang, I go to the airport. And when I go through customs, you remember, I have to have something to get out of the country. The guy looks at it and just slams it up and hands it to me, and I'm gone. So, but who are the 4 Bs? I'll never forget that. So, I actually didn't know who won the World Series the year before, but I did know who the 4 Bs were. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Abe. Gary Delp moved to Missoula in 1991 to go to college. 6 months later, he had quit school and was living out of a backpack while hitchhiking and train hopping around the West. In 1994, he started work as a building dismantler. He owns Heritage Timber with his wife, Becky, and even their 3 children, ages 3, 5, and 6, contribute to the family business by sorting nuts, bolts, and other hardware. Please welcome Gary Delp.
Happy winter, everybody. We're going to bring it back to Missoula a little bit. This story takes place here. The first time I saw Linda, she was riding her bike on an old road that is now part of the Missoula River Trail system. It was a beautiful June day. The sun was shining, and Linda was dressed for the season. She had on a summer sun hat, a long dress, pumps. Her face was made up. And on that early summer day, you know, she just looked, well, she looked happy. But what I immediately thought when I saw her was, what are you doing here just a week later, back here at the scene of the crime? Now, the scene of the crime was the old Champion Mill, a 20-acre piece of ground over just south of the Clark Fork River in the middle of Missoula. The year was 1995. I was 24 years old and finishing up my first year in what would become my career as a building dismantler. We were taking down some buildings there. I was living on site in an old office building with two other guys, Barrett and Jeff. In an old office building that had no power, no running water, but it was good enough for us. And a couple days before the night in question, a windstorm had blown through Missoula, and it had blown plywood and metal roofing all over the place at the mill and created quite a mess of things. And it also blew down a couple copper power lines, old defunct power lines at the other side of the mill. Jeff, a friend and an employee, asked me one day after work if he could cut the copper, bring it in for scrap. I said, Jeff, that'd be fine. So a day or two later, it's Friday night, and Jeff and Barrett had been out tying one on at the local bars and knocked on my door. I was fast asleep. Hey, Del, can I borrow some bolt cutters, cut that wire down? And I mumbled, sure, knock yourself out. Fell back to sleep. And an indeterminate amount of time later, I was awakened by the sound of a pickup truck screaming across the mill. It had a flat tire. And Jeff screaming at the top of his lungs, Delp! Delp! Give me a gun! Delp! They killed my dog! They stabbed Aspen! They tried to kill me! Give me a gun! I don't know what's going on. Wake up, I hear a little bit more, get out of bed. Jeff runs up the porch, he throws up on my door, Delp! They stabbed my dog, they killed Aspen, they tried to kill me, give me a fucking gun! Now, you would have to be a complete idiot to give a gun to somebody who is clearly very drunk, highly agitated, to avenge the death of their best friend in the whole world. The pistol I gave him was a Target 22. It was a semi-automatic. It had a hair trigger. He took the magazine and the pistol. He went out the door. He hopped in his truck. And Barrett, who he'd been out drinking with, who got woken up by all the commotion, hopped in the passenger side of the truck. He shut the door. Boom! Gun goes off. Barrett jumps out of the truck. Man, you almost shot me. Jeff puts the hammer down and goes flying across the mill. A few moments later, I hear gunshots. And my heart goes into the pit of my stomach, and I think my friend has just maybe killed somebody. I'm getting dressed. I get a shotgun. I load it up because I don't know what the fuck is going on. I walk out the door. I go to my truck, and I see the headlights of the red Toyota and the flat tire coming back across the mill. Jeff comes up, and I said, hey, did you just shoot somebody? No, man, no, they weren't there. I just shot into the side of the building. And then I heard his dog moaning, and I look in the back of his truck, and Aspen's there, and he's bloody, and he's got a big hole in his side. And I run inside the office, and I call the phone. I call the emergency vet. And they tell me who the vet on call that night is. I run outside. I say, Jeff, get in the back of my truck, man. Let's go. He grabs his dog, climbs in the bed of the truck, and I'm flying out of the west side of the mill, and in my rearview mirror, I can see the red and blue lights of the cops coming in the other side. We get out to Russell Street. We're flying down. I'm doing 50 miles an hour. And somehow, Sandy Moore, the vet at AnnCare, beat us there, and she's amazing. We bring the dog inside. We bring her into the back room, and she examines the dog. We're helping hold him, and she says, you know, it's below his diaphragm, but I don't think it hit any major organs. You know, your dog, it might be all right. She said, I'll sedate it. I'll stay with it for the night. There's nothing you guys can do. Why don't you go home and try and get some sleep? So Jeff and I leave the vet, and we get in the front of my truck, and we're driving back to the mill, and I say, Jeff, what the hell happened? And he said he walked over there, got my bolt cutters, went over the power line. There was 3 or 4 or 5 power poles close together. And there was a ladder that went up about 20 feet to a metal grate. Jeff climbed up the ladder to the metal grate and was trying to figure out how to get up to cut the other side of the power lines. And these 2 guys came out of the shadows. And they said, boy, that's our copper. Son, you crossed the line. That's our copper. Now, Jeff, he's a young guy. He was burly. He was strong. He was a hell of a worker. But he wasn't a fighter. He said, yeah, you know, my bad. It's your copper, you know. It's your copper. No, son. No, you crossed the line, boy. We're going to kill you. Whoa. Your copper, you know. You can have the bolt cutters. I don't want any trouble. No, son. You crossed the fucking line. There were 2 guys, one little guy, or maybe he was a regular-sized guy, but his buddy was 6'3", 6'4", if he was a foot, and he was broad and he was muscular, and that big guy started climbing up the ladder. The whole time they're threatening him, we're going to kill you, you crossed the line, it's our copper. The whole time, Jeff, no, it's a mistake, it's yours. The big guy gets his head up above the level of the deck, and he looks at Jeff. He's got curly blonde hair and these thick glasses, and he looks at Jeff and he says, boy, you could kick me off of here right now. Jeff says, no, man, I don't want any trouble. The guy gets up on the deck, he takes a big swing, and Jeff just ducked it. He said he realized at that point this guy was drunker than he was. He reeked of whiskey. And they tussled a little bit at that tower, and all of a sudden Jeff found himself flat on his back on the metal grate. The guy had his hands around his neck, and his thumb was pressing tight in Jeff's trachea. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't yell. He couldn't do anything. And the guy's buddy down below is yelling, don't kill him! Don't kill him! And, you know, I have no idea. I think they were just kind of fucking with Jeff, but all of a sudden, this big guy's standing above him, pressing his thumb in his trachea, and it's kind of seems out of it. But all of a sudden, he sort of snaps out of it, and I honestly don't remember how it all transpired at that point, but they all ended up down on the ground level. A couple more wild swings, and Jeff's dog, Aspen, kind of a Malamute husky sort of dog, always rode in the back of this truck, always went everywhere with him. He jumped out of the pickup, just kind of to check things out. He wasn't growling or doing anything. He went up to the smaller guy, and the guy grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and lifted him up on his back legs, took a knife out of his pocket and buried it in his side. Dog dropped. Everybody froze. And Jeff ran for his truck. He hopped in his truck, he fired it up, and he tried to run those 2 guys over. He said he bumped up against one of them, but they took off, and I don't know, he hit a piece of metal, hit a board with a nail in it, but somehow he flattened his tire, and he went driving across the mill. Delp, give me a gun. They killed my dog. We got back to the mill, and I said, hey, Jeff, you know, you got a flat tire. Why don't you stay here? You know, I'm going to try and get some sleep. There's nothing we can do, and that's what I did. So the next day, I called my buddy Micah, best friend. I said, Micah, you will not believe what happened at the mill last night. And I told him the whole story. I got to the part about the big guy. Long, blonde, curly hair, thick glasses. God, he had to have been 6'4", according to Jeff. And Micah said, holy shit, dude, I think I know that guy. That's Linda. Linda was a transgender woman who wanted to get an operation to make a full transition, but the VA wouldn't pay for it. She was also chronically homeless and an alcoholic, and she had a mountain bike and a burly trailer, and she'd go around at night and procure copper or other metal to sell for scrap. And she used to get her bike worked on at New Era Bikes, where my buddy Micah worked, and hang out there, and so that's how he knew her. Several months later, at the end of the summer, I was doing a job over at Bitterroot Flower Shop, right across 6th Street from New Era Bikes. And a lot of afternoons, I would head over and hang out with Micah, hang out with the bike mechanics there. And one time I went over, and Linda was sitting in the back alley. She was just sitting on the pavement, and I had 2 dogs, and they went up to her, and she let them lick her face, and she was patting them and stuff. And it turned out Linda was a dog lover. I ended up kind of shooting the shit with her. I didn't tell her what I did for work. I didn't tell her where I lived earlier that summer. But, I walked away thinking that, she just seemed like a decent person. Micah told me back then that one time he overheard a conversation she was having. She was using their payphone with her dad, kind of a heated conversation, and he doesn't remember it, and I don't remember the details now, but the gist of it was, she was talking to her dad. She said, "Dad, Kevin," or whatever her birth name was, "Kevin died in Vietnam. I'm Linda now, and I wish you could accept it." That night, everybody involved, everybody ended up okay. Aspen, the dog, he made a full recovery. Jeff, he got over the trauma of the night. And Barrett, Barrett didn't get shot. But I think of Linda, and wherever she is now, if she's even still alive. But I guess my hope is, if she is, that she's found some level of peace and happiness, like I saw on her face when she was riding her bike so many years ago by the old mill. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Big thanks again to all of you who came out on this cold night to warm your hearts with storytelling. Thanks to our sponsors, the Top Hat Lounge, the Wilma, CabinetParts.com, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction Books, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Designs, Find, and Martin McCain Woodworks and Design. Thanks to all of our volunteers who helped put this on, and thanks to all of our storytellers. Our last storyteller, Jeffrey Sutton, is a recognized business leader of the arts. As a professional photographer, Jeff has numerous images published. His work has appeared in Newsweek, Parade, the New York Times, USA Today, and on the cover of 24 magazines. As owner of Sutton West Gallery, he represented many nationally recognized artists. Jeff worked at the Montana World Trade Center as a micro-business developer with artisans in rural Montana, Panama, Chile, New Zealand, and India. He is also an avid motorcyclist who traveled through China, Russia, the Middle East, and many other countries exploring the world. Jeff has also worked with many Missoula nonprofits. Please welcome Jeff Sutton.
Buenas noches. My story starts in 1975. I was taking a gap year between my undergraduate and graduate work as an anthropologist. As an undergraduate, I happened to do some research in Mexico in the mountains of Michoacan in a little Indian village where I learned really bad Spanish. So I decided that I would try out my bad Spanish and go to South America. I took off in November of 1975. I was 23 years old. No internet, no cell phone, no credit card, about $1,500 in my pocket. I started in Ecuador, made my way all the way down to Bolivia, coming down the Altiplano, down into the jungle, and I'm going to cross the border into Argentina. So I get to this little town called Aguas Blancas, and I have to take a boat and go across the river, and I go through this little jungle passport center, and I get on the bus, and I'm going to go to Salta, Argentina. And as soon as the bus comes out of the jungle, we're surrounded by military people, and everybody's ordered off the bus. And so everybody gets off. We all get searched and our papers checked, and I get back on the bus and I go, what was that all about? Well, they're a bunch of rebels in Argentina, and they're searching for rebels and stopping everybody. So I get to Salta, I get stopped again, frisked, searched. I'm not really thinking too much about it. It seems just to be a little bit of a hassle. So I hitchhike from Salta all the way to Resistencia, where I get picked up again. This time they take me in to strip search me, which is kind of like going to a proctologist with guns. But but I was on my way to visit a friend up in Brazil, and I went up to Brazil and I borrowed some money, and everybody's telling me, you got to go back to Buenos Aires. It's really a great, great town, and it's the Paris of South America. So on March 17th, I arrived back in Argentina, and I make my way to Buenos Aires, and I have about $500 left. And so I'm not sure I can really make it all the way back to Missoula on $500. So I go to a travel agency, and I'm talking to this gal, Maria Cecilia Cortez was her name, and I guess I was flirting, I'm not sure. But anyway, we ended up going out that night, and I didn't buy the ticket, and we spent the next 3 nights kind of running around Buenos Aires and having just a great time, and staying out to 4 o'clock in the morning. Buenos Aires is really a cool town. And she goes, well, I want to invite you to this party, but it's kind of a hoity-toity party, and I don't want to tell my friends that I just met you at the travel agency. So we had to make up a story that I'd met her at an embassy party in Brazil, and on top of that, she made me buy a new shirt. And so I go to this party, and it's pretty hoity-toity, and there's all these young people, and we're having a great time, and it's now March 25th, and everybody's having a nice conversation, and all of a sudden, gunfire and explosions. And everybody goes, oh, golpe, paso, the golpe, el golpe. The kick is happening. And they were overthrowing the government that night of Isabel Perón. So we're all kind of looking out the window, and well, there's tanks and everything, and they got loudspeakers, please go to your homes and go to your hotels. And so I go back to my hotel. Next morning, I kind of get up, and I'm going, wow, this is pretty wild. I go down to the Casa Rosada, and I actually see them taking Isabel Perón away. She was the third wife of Juan Perón, and they had just overthrown her. And I take pictures of the tanks in the streets and everything, and people are looking in windows where their television's watching what's going on. But they had declared martial law, and habeas corpus had been thrown out, and so I go back to my hotel and I go, well, gosh, I got to get out of here. This isn't going to be all that much fun. So I go to the bus station with my bag and everything, and I'm going to go to Mendoza. They got good wine over there, and I was going to go see friends in Chile. Well, I never made it to the window, and these guys picked me up, and I'm going, well, shit, I've already been through this 3 times, no big deal. And there's this French kid walking next to me, and they got about 20 of us are taken to the police station, and he's going, merde, merde, merde. And I go, hey, they know what that means, calm down. So we get to the police station, and I got my Panama hat on, and I walk in, and the guy takes a pistol out, hits me in the back of the head, and says, don't you have manners? You take your hat off when you come inside. And that kind of changed my tone about everything a little bit. And so they look through my bag and they interrogate me, and they take me into this jail yard, and there's German shepherds on lines, and I said, well, we're feeding the prisoners now, and they give me bread and rice, and I finish it, and I go back to the door and said, I'm done. And they go, no, you stay here. Well, there were like 8 cells, and they were all filled with people. So that night, I'm on the sidewalk under the overhang in front of the cells, German shepherds out here, and I'm sleeping. I had my sleeping bag. And about midnight, I hear this boom, big explosion. And all of a sudden, all the dogs are barking, and the lights come back on, and the guys run in with guns and throw us all up against the wall. Next thing I know, I got a gun to my head. And they're patting me down. And apparently the rebels had thrown a grenade at the building that night. And next day, I did manage to get into one of the cells. And the next few days, I'm with these guys, and I'm finding out that the rebels have been attacking all these buildings and police stations and all these things that are happening in Buenos Aires. And on the other side, Isabel Perón's government has started the dirty war, and they start sending out assassination squads and death squads, killing people. And so things are kind of tense before the revolution. After about 3 days, they come and get me and take me to another police station, and they fingerprint me and mugshot me. And I'm kind of going, hey, man, could I get a copy of that picture? Took me into this room under the lights, and they're doing this whole interrogation thing. And they have all my maps, and I'm dyslexic, so I use my photos as sort of a diary of where I've been. And I had been circling everything I photographed. Well, I had circled all these buildings I had photographed, the White House, the communication, the Admiralty. Well, they kind of wondered what I was doing with all this. And all of a sudden, I go into this cheap Mexican accent, go, hey, senor, I'm from Montana, you know. We got deer and we got antelope and cowboys and Indians and all these things, you know. I'm no terrorist. And I said, you know that John Wayne, that's where I'm from. They got the John Wayne movie. And so I spent the night in the jail again. And next day they took me back to where my bag was, and I spent a few more days. And then they pick me up again and take me to the office. And they're very nice. They say, here's your money, here's your passport. But we would really like you to leave the country. Now, we know you want to go to Chile, and you can go, but you have to fly. And so they take me to the airport, and they put me on a plane, and I fly to Santiago, Chile. You know, had I known at the time what was really going on, after the coup, they rounded up journalists, intellectuals, college professors, students, and the death squads were a little inefficient because they left bodies, so they decided to make people disappear. And they rounded up 150,000 Argentinians and put them in 300 concentration camps. Almost 30,000 disappeared with no trace. And after the junta fell in 1983, they put the officers on trial, and they found a commander of the naval station outside of Buenos Aires, and they were bringing busloads of prisoners in, shooting them up with a drug that would paralyze them, putting them in cargo planes and flying them out over the ocean into shark-infested waters and dumping them out. During this time, the U.S. government gave $1 billion to the junta, and just today it was announced in the paper that the Obama administration is releasing the secret documents on what happened during the revolution. I got to Argentina, I got to Chile, and a lot of people said, well, how'd you get out? And I said, well, you know, maybe they believed my story, I was just traveling through, maybe they hated my Mexican accent. But I kind of like to think that it was because they'd actually seen a John Wayne movie. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to all of you for coming out. Thank you most of all to all of our storytellers, Geraldine Carter, Gary Warchola, Ann Karp, Greg Reagan, Paula Short, Charles Abe Abramson, Gary Delp, and Jeff Sutton. Thanks for an incredible 2016 season. The next Tell Us Something event is at the Wilma on March 21st. The theme is Don't Look Back. Ticket on sale date will be announced on Facebook page and the website tellussomething.org. So like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Get your tickets when they go on sale, and please subscribe to the podcast. Happy holidays, and we'll see you next year.